Good afternoon and welcome to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and today is MCK Friday. Today I'm joined by Chief Tonya Perron and Chief Ross Montour. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's glad to be here.
How's it going? Great.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we may as well start with the issue that Joe asked me to bring up, which was health and safety issues regarding cannabis and the sale and et cetera, et cetera. And I think people have a little bit of a misunderstanding when they're talking about it's not legal within our community and the law. So I don't know which one want to start off. And Tonya, you need to move a little closer to the mic or we will not hear you.
Or vice versa.
Okay,
Yeah.
Is this better?
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
All right, so we've had quite a few questions come in from various community members, both at the council as well as to some of us personally. And it seems that there's a little bit of confusion as to what's legal, what's not legal, what should be sold here, what can't be sold here. So we decided that maybe it would be best to come on the radio and try to set the record straight so that there's some more clarity over the matter. So basically, the way that things are right now, we do not have our Cannabis Control Board in place. Therefore, although we have the law that has been passed, it's not actually been completely put into force in the sense that there are no licenses that have been issued. So in essence, there's still the moratorium in place in the community. That being said, the bottom line is that the sale of any cannabis-related product, including those containing products that just contain CBD or THC, are not legally sold within the territory, cannot be legally sold. Outside of our territory, of course, we have the provincial body, which is the SQDC, which does supply products, and those are the only, in Quebec for the moment, legally obtained products or legally purchased products in Quebec.
Right.
And source.
Okay.
And source, and that's important. You know, what for me, one of the questions that came up when Tonya and I were talking about it was I was aware that there were places either online or local and at least some maybe internal too that were selling CBD products, and really it's a learning experience to find out that under the law they're not legally sold. So within the community, in terms of our law, there aren't any of those that are legal unless you have a prescription for it,
yes.
and you have gotten it from a legal source, and so. And you know, I think there's confusion that comes up sometimes, and it's good to ask the questions.
I know I've heard that often because, you know, some people will say, well, I'm doing this, but they also have a prescription from a doctor, which can be misleading because then people think, well, they can get it. Why can't everybody else get it here in the community? Then what's legal, what's not legal? And, you know, what can the peacekeepers enforce, not enforce? And those are the, you know, questions that keep coming up.
Exactly. So those that have a prescription still have to get their supply from a licensed supplier.
Right.
So once again, in Quebec, that would be the SQDC, either at their local retailer or online. You can also order from the SQDC. So it still has to come from a legal supply. In terms of products that are not necessarily cannabis as we commonly think about it, you know, a bag of marijuana, a joint, in terms of the other products such as creams, topicals, lip balms, those are not legal at all within Canada for the moment.
Either. And you will see.
With the new law, nothing.
No.
Those are not legal.
No, and they haven't been if they
Yeah.
haven't come from a legal source. That's what we come to learn. You know,
And there are no legal sources for that at the moment.
yeah.
Wow.
So any of those products that say CBD, so the CBD lip balm, even that, it's not considered legal at the moment because CBD is still regulated. THC, I haven't seen many products with that on. It's more the CBD, I think, that's come up quite often. And even in Plattsburgh, you see that they're selling the CBD product. Yeah. I don't know what the law is in New York State. But anyways, that over here, it's not legal. So if within the community members are seeing at different stores some of these products being offered for sale on the counter, community members need to know that they're not legal. They're not there's no regulation for them yet. We don't know where those products came from, what's really in it. It may have ingredients written on the label, but anybody can type up a label and stick it on a product. Any products that would be considered legal would have to have certain identifying marks on the packaging, such as there is a stamp, there's a standardized cannabis symbol, there's all the information related to the ingredients, So if you pick up a product and it doesn't have that stamp, like that it's approved by Health Canada.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes, the excise, they call it an excise stamp. Then it's not legal.
Yeah, I just want to point out too, since it came up in the discussion about whether something is sold in the United States or not. Everybody by now who crosses over the border with any degree of familiarity is seeing that sign before you get to the frontier, which is cannabis leaf with a red circle and a line through it. Don't bring anything over the line. But that works coming back into the country too. Let's say you went over to the U.S. someplace and you found in a pharmacy something with CBDs. You are at peril if by some chance coming back into the Canadian side, you came to be discovered having one of those products because it isn't legal here.
So you could be charged at border or could be stopped pending what you have, right?
They certainly will question you at the border. Whether they'll eventually charge you, I guess, will depend on what you have and what quantity you have, but it may be seized for sure, and you definitely would get a firm warning. That also goes to edibles. I noticed I had a couple of questions from some younger community members about edibles, these gummy bears, candies. None of that is legal at the moment, and I know they're available online. I've verified, and Ross and I actually both verified some online websites where you can. I saw one online. There's a website you could do a search. It says weed maps. No, seriously.
Really?
Yeah, weed maps, and then you'll see. I mean, there's actually one source that comes up, and it's purports to be selling 3 varieties of basically gummy bears. One which they promise has a guarantee of 100 milligrams of THC, one with 200, and one with 300 milligrams of THC. Number one, that's most definitely illegal.
Yeah.
You cannot legally buy that. You cannot legally sell it. You are in peril of a criminal charge as a result of purchasing it, selling it. And you have to think about this. People need to consider that. If it hasn't been from an approved source, you have no guarantee of what you're ingesting. Yeah. It's really no different than buying your drugs from the drug dealer in the alley.
Yeah.
You have no guarantee what's in it, what's not into it. What somebody guarantees it's this, there's no guarantee.
I'm glad you're bringing it up. We're going to take a break and come back because I think that's a very important discussion, because I think sometimes people are not aware of what people are doing today to guarantee that they're staying on these drugs. And sometimes it's just a one-shot deal and you're done. And we've seen it time and time again, stories. And, I'd like to talk a little bit more about it. Yeah. We'll take a break. Welcome back to Tetewathá, Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and today is MCK Friday, and I'm joined by Chief Russ Montour and Chief Tonya Perron, and we're talking about the health and safety concerns regarding cannabis and what's legal and what's not legal. Prior to going to break, we were discussing, the safety, and I remember a year and a half ago, I had guests on the show talking about fentanyl and those types of drugs that were laced with THC, laced with every other kind of thing, and there were people who were dying across the country and in the United States from one pill because people weren't sure what was being put in terms of it. So I think sometimes people forget when you're buying this stuff, where you're buying, reading labels, what's good for you, what's not good for you. Even if, it's your doctor's prescribing it, there's certain conditions that you have to have in taking the drug, certain whatever. And when you're buying off the street, you have no clue. I remember one was laced with rat poisoning.
Well, I mean, that's been since forever.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, the fact whether it was paraquat at one period of time that cannabis was laced with. It's interesting that you put it the other way around when you were talking about it as fentanyl laced with THC.
Yeah.
Because really, it's a good point, because if you take something like that, that particular very destructive substance outweighs any notion that somehow or another THC could serve a good purpose,
right,
or not. And there are health concerns in that, and that's one of the reasons why you want to have a good, strong, safety-oriented regulation and regulatory regime for that will manage the sale, production of these products. You want to make sure you have to protect people.
Yeah. And I think that's what brought this up, was the safety, right? The health and safety, because little is known, and I think that was a ploy on the government's part. It was like they were saving it once the tobacco industry, alcohol industry, food industry started outweighing, they needed to come up with a financial thing that was going to keep government going. I don't sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but I really do think it was a ploy, because for years and years, marijuana wasn't good for you. All of a sudden now it cures everything under the sun.
Well, I think a lot of the reason why I think it became also important to regulate it was, and we all seen this, that, it was there. It was out there. It was being sold, but it was being sold on what's commonly referred to as black market. It's, it's, and no regulations. And once again, tying that into the whole health and safety. We don't know where it's coming from. Where was it grown? Was it mold infested? Was it produced in a facility that was clean? Are there any added chemicals, etc.? So, I think seeing that, it became evident that something had to be done to, okay, let's make it legal, but let's heavily regulate it. Yes, there's an economic side to it too, of course, and that economic side also goes towards the deterring the use of the black market and taking away the economy from them. So it's sort of a twofold, I think.
But not only that. If you look at the tobacco industry, which I'm talking about. Big tobacco, okay, which Canada has, say, a handle on, and the United States has a handle on in terms of regulation and taxation and so on. But I hesitate to be so cynical about it as just in terms of money. But there is a mitigating expense, because if you look at the health statistics related to the consumption of tobacco products, or whether it's alcohol, addiction, abatement, mitigation, that is also reflected in that sort of regulatory regime and the taxation regime, is that because those things over time have a cost. Yeah, they have a cost which is felt to society, and it's something that everybody bears. And so for, if you look at it in terms of the local regulation, ours, okay, we're looking at the same things, One of the things that I recall people saying to me is, well, there's an ambivalent feeling about, the whole idea of, the legalization of cannabis. What people were saying to me is that, like, you have to regulate it. And say on that other side, there has to be a benefit to the community. Now, part of the benefit is from the revenue stream that it provides to provide for unfunded program enhancements, things in the community, but also for the health side of it, I think.
And I think sometimes that's a little bit of the value of this. It's the health versus economy. But if it's an economic thing, and if you look at the tobacco industry, I think it was fine. But then all of a sudden they were proving that most of these industries were putting like 53 chemicals inside a cigarette. It wasn't pure tobacco. And I think that's where it goes, the manipulation. If you look at food, the food industry, same thing. It's legal. And then they sugar up on everything, and sugar's the number one killer. You know, for years and years they bounced back and forth. But now the research is starting to say it's the sugar.
Well, people commonly talk about food-like substances, which form a majority of a lot of our diets.
And again, addiction. You know, it's not just what we need and what's healthy, what's in balance. And if you, like for me, I parallel all of these things, and what are they trying to push in this one as well, you know?
Well, that's the other thing in terms of addiction. As I was stating earlier, you know, it's always been there. It's always been around us. But there's no money coming to the organizations for the prevention and the education of, you know, the addictions portion. So you have on the illegal side a bunch of businesses making tons of money off of this, but yet there's no money there, additional funds to combat the addictions
and
portion of it.
I think that's the balance, or a little bit of balance.
Exactly,
of it,
and
know?
that is the balance. If you look at the SQDC website, all of their profits go towards prevention programs for addictions, according to what they say on there. So I'm quoting their site. You know, so when you look at it that way, yes, it's being regulated. I mean, yes, it's employing people. So you have a bit of, you know, you have the economic part of it, but also there's that part of giving back and trying to at least educate and prevent from happening. And that ties in, of course, too with the youth.
Yeah. I just have a couple of questions or comments from the community. It's a good thing that they're not allowed to sell here, said one caller, because in Gunnesadage, every cigarette store sells it, and you could have a war, and that's what's going on. Another comment that came in: Vermont gives a license to grow medicinal consumption if you have cancer. Do what you want with this, you know. And I guess part of it is I think there are medicinal benefits, but they're contained.
Okay, I'm glad that the caller brought that up. We had a discussion around that for clarification. Okay, now it has been medical cannabis has been legal in Canada for a number of years. Okay, and within that regime, it was legal to say grow up a certain number of plants. Okay, for your medical consumption. However, okay, you had to have a prescription to do so. You have to, and it's not had, it still is. You have to have a prescription. You have to get even your seeds from a registered, licensed supply for that, and only that. It isn't that, you know, I went someplace where they were selling it and got some seed and decided I'm going to grow my own. It's because I got headaches or I got what have you. It's still legally, you have to have a prescription, and you still have to get your product from, and even there was a discussion about whether it was edibles, even if you had oil, for medicinal purposes. Okay, you have to get that from a medically licensed supplier for that particular product. I don't know if I've said that exactly correct.
Yes, the oils, there was some discussion around edibles. You could have the CBD oil, particularly if you have a prescription, but also if you get it now, because I believe it is available through the SQDC. And you could make your own edibles. You can't sell them, though.
And I think that's the key to this, right? Is the sale. Personal use is fine, but when it goes into selling, and then it opens up legal.
Well, as long as people bear in mind that what's legal is only that which is prescribed and gotten from a legal source, a
Right.
legally recognized source. Anything else is illegal, and neither protects you on a health level nor on a legal level. So if you just said, well, I'm growing weed in my house for my own personal medical use, it isn't legal. It's not legal in Kahnawake, but it's not legal outside of Kahnawake either.
And I also think one of the things I remember about the law, and when we had some of the other MCK people in, one of the things that was clear is you were only allowed a certain amount. Like you weren't allowed the larger amounts for sale. You weren't allowed anything that in the regular law outside of here, it's for personal use only. And that was very clear.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Those rules still apply. So even within our territory, within Kahnawake, you can possess products that you have legally purchased.
Right.
So they're from a licensed supplier, as long as you're within the prescribed limits.
Right.
And you're totally within your legal right to do so. What you have to be careful of course, like everybody should, is if you are using the product and you have children around, obviously don't leave it accessible to children.
And I mean, a lot of comments I've heard within the community really has to do with that, is the safety of children or being around, or someone who gets behind the wheel of a vehicle. And, you know, and I think sometimes when they put the law in place, they hadn't thought of all of those things. You know, can you drive under the influence? Can you do those kinds? No, you can't, you know, and there was no public relations. No, it was after the law went through. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's zero tolerance for cannabis. Unlike alcohol, it depends, you know, if you're over the limit. But with cannabis, it's zero tolerance.
For greater certainty.
Yes, you go, Ross.
Okay. just so people understand, okay? Any CBD or THC product bought in Kahnawake at this point in time is illegal. Any CBD or THC product that was not bought at the SQDC, okay, is illegal. Any topical, any edible, driving after consuming cannabis, working after consuming cannabis, providing cannabis to a minor, very bad, you're in great peril, smoking cannabis in prohibited areas, and selling any cannabis products is illegal. Period.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts.
No.
That's it.
Okay.
You know, in the rest of Canada, well, I don't even go so far as to say the rest of Canada, but in other parts of Canada, since the legalization of recreational cannabis, there's been allowance for individuals to grow I think it's 4 plants or something like that. Yep. However, that isn't the case in Quebec.
Right.
And we are within Kahnawake's regulation applying the same yardstick. You know, I think it's worthwhile to point out, when I sat in your chair,
you go, Ross.
When I first started to interview counselors who were working on the cannabis file, the preeminent thing that came to my mind was the health and safety issue. You know, and so that still weighs heavily on me. And I had a conversation at home this morning when I said, when I looked at Canada website, you know, about potential impacts and something, it's like, oh my God, well then maybe should we be involved in this or whatever all else? Okay, look we regulate alcohol in the community. Okay, now I personally, legal or not, regulated in Kahnawake or not, on a personal level, I choose that it's not a part of my life. I don't use it. The same thing will apply and does apply for me, having to do with this product or these products. Yeah. Okay, I do not. Okay, just because it's legal, it isn't. And if we do have a regulated industry with regard to that, we're still at our heart focused on safety and health, okay, and abating or mitigating against the also accumulated effects between safety, immediate, like you mentioned, fentanyl and things like that, but also addictions.
Yeah, any type of addiction.
And that's an important, really important. I think what you have to consider is that Kahnawake, by far right now, is probably the most advanced, far-looking Indigenous community right now in Canada that is looking at the most conscientious safety-oriented regulation of cannabis in the country. I would go so far as to say that.
And I think that's what's important, is not to lose sight of that. And I think sometimes, it's how do we weigh the two? There's an economy. Yeah, we need to have education. We need to have awareness. And I think we've come a long way. And I guess I come from that side because I've been involved with it for so long as part of my life too. And, when I look at the community addictions, we want to break those cycles. Yep. We don't want to have dependency on any kind of drug. It doesn't matter whatever the drug of choice. We want healthy people. We want our culture. We want our language. We want that. Well, that doesn't match some of these addictive things that people have, because that's the stuff that put us where we were. That and the Indian Act. I had to throw that in.
But that's for another show.
That's another show, but I had to throw that one in.
Well, again, one of the things that really concerned me when I was the host of this program was, from the health side, I had been looking at documentaries that were talking about the impact on a developing brain. And I've said this on this program a number of times. Yeah. Okay. And that was a particular interest in me. And I learned that the younger somebody starts the use of, the more likely they're going to have a problem with addictions. Yeah. Something like 1 in 6, anywhere from 1 in 10 to 1 in 6 people will develop dependencies related to this across the spectrum, the age spectrum. Yeah. But also the issue in terms of the family history of mental illness becomes a really profound factor in cannabis use, and so they're part of the sort of the regime is for education around that as well.
Welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and today is MCK Friday, and I'm joined by Chief Tonya Perron as well as Chief Ross Montour. And we're talking about health and safety issues regarding cannabis. And I did have one more question from a community member. In terms of what is the time frame for legalization in Kahnawake, and please be specific.
Well,
that's a loaded question.
In a second.
Actually, during the break, Tonya and I were chatting together about that particular thing. But I gotta say from the outset, before I hand it over to Tonya, is that if people in the community are wondering if we could pitch them an exact date for when that comes to be, we cannot do that at this point, and Tonya will explain why.
That's a great segue.
So we did put out to the request or the call for applicants. Sure that many community members have seen it, for the Cannabis Control Board as well as the Cannabis Health and Safety Committee. The deadline for the application was March 15th, so we have received applications.
Oh, good.
We'll be moving on to the next stage in the process, which will be the eventual selection of the board members. And depending on the number of applicants that wish to sit on the Health and Safety Committee, that is supposed to go to a vote, so there's supposed to be a vote by the community.
Just to clarify, there's one member for the Health and Safety Committee.
For the moment,
only one.
We've only received one applicant specifically for that, so unless some of the ones that applied and didn't mention it specifically might be interested, it seems like we only have one, so whether or not that will have to go to a vote is questionable.
The other aspect to the Health and Safety Committee is that there are specific bodies entities within Kahnawake. That's the hospital, KSCS, Step by Step. And so all of those organizations were asked to submit the name of somebody who would be willing to sit on the Health and Safety Committee.
Right.
Okay. And that we're still working on. I've spoken to a couple of organizational directors who suggested either they have a name for somebody or will be asking. So that's still something we want to encourage the organizations that are related to this particular aspect of health and safety for cannabis And the other part that we've been working on, Tonya and I are part of the Cannabis Working Group, in setting up the law moving forward. You need to have, we now are in the process of selecting the control board. Okay, and they will be the body that actualizes and implements the law in practice.
They have to develop the regulations.
Okay.
Once the board is set up, they will be responsible for developing the regulations, and then from there, once the regulations are in place,
it's the operationalization of the law.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
At that point, and then really, it's the council that will then deal with the issue of the moratorium that exists. But the moratorium exists and will continue to exist until all those things
Are set in place.
are in place.
Exactly. So as you can see, time-wise, it's hard to put an exact deadline or, deadline for it. Of course, we want whoever's going to be forming the board is going to have a lot of work to do. And of course, we'd like it done as fast as possible. But, we have to all understand, too, that board members usually have full-time jobs as well.
Right.
And
a lot of people are on the same boards because we have
Exactly.
an issue of volunteering in our community.
Exactly. So you have sometimes people that their time is spread very thinly between work, other boards, family responsibilities. So, it's asking a lot of them to put a lot of their time in.
And then at the front end, this is going to be really time consuming
Okay.
And commitment. Okay. And for how long that period lasts really depends on, because we're looking for capacity, but then there's a training component to that as well that will need to be addressed. So it's a question of finding candidates who are have good capacity to be able to function in that, and then there's still specific training. They have to be trained about what the law is. And setting up regulatory boards.
regulations.
Regulations.
Yeah.
So it's still got a ways to go, probably.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not a question of stalling. People might be wondering, okay, well, when finally,
Yeah.
okay. It's really about getting things done as quickly as possible, but to the best way possible. To really be a well-functioning law.
Plus, I think,
protecting people.
but you also have, I would assume, because there's two bodies, the two bodies too would need to kind of work together, the education, health.
The safety committee, you mean?
Safety committee, yeah.
Well, the health and safety committee is going to be the advisory body.
Oh, okay.
It will be responsible for monitoring the impacts of the law and on the health and safety, of course, of the community. So it will have to work in tandem with the control board, but the board itself will be responsible for developing the regulations and issuing the licenses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we got to still look ways to go, I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. I mean, we were not given a nice brochure from Canada when this came about to say, here you go, this is exactly how you just need to approach it, and these are all the things you need to put in place, and this is how much it's going to cost you, so here you go and run with it. I mean, this has been, we have to crawl before we can walk, as they say, and we're
I just had found it very interesting how this legislation had come to be, and how how this, like, it was like putting the cart before the horse, in my opinion, and I'm not sure what the thinking behind it was. You knew it was coming, but then all of a sudden it was bang, bang, bang. And then now we're adding laws or adding parameters and I'm not talking in Kahnawake, I'm talking globally, which has been a little bit different than, usually you're prepared for or a little bit better than this. And it was just a different.
I'm not sure how you meant about it, putting the cart before the horse. But if I take your statement and I think about how Canada passed legislation and then didn't take into account the concerns that came up in the Indigenous community, I think that's definitely a case of that.
Yeah.
But my response to that is that the response here, as difficult as it may have been, has been a really, really thought out and considered approach to it, and trying to cover all the bases in a way that ensures that you have, the best way to manage this that we can possibly come up with, taking into account all aspects.
And I think, let me clarify, I wasn't talking about here locally.
No,
I was on the outside, because all of a sudden, then the legislation.
Nobody asked us.
Nobody asked, when the law, will they give the community a share of the EGDs, whatever that means?
EGDs.
No, that's a completely different subject.
Okay.
It has, just for clarification to the questioner.
Community,
Yeah, the community member who asked the question, the EGDs are the electronic gaming devices, and that's under a different agreement and arrangement, and they are contributing. I think the guarantee is for... it's a 1.6 a year, but it's substantial.
Yeah.
Okay, don't quote me on the exact number. So, but that's already an agreement that's taken place. What we can tell you about the cannabis legislation and the economic potential there is that, as people said, the community has to see a tangible benefit.
And I think that's been discussed several times with different other chiefs as well, because that's been the biggest concern, because we have all these economic opportunities and things that are coming back to commune. But when you look in the grand scheme of things, the people who seem to need the extra money are the ones who are still fundraising like crazy. Any sports, any recreation, any schools, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is what you hear majority of the time from the community.
Well, that's if you look at the cannabis control law, there's actually a section related to mandatory community contributions, and in there are going to be those required. They're going to be collected, and they are going to be used to help fund community initiatives that that are lacking funding.
Yeah, because we still have a lot, as far ahead as we are, we're still, because the funder, and I just had the Indigenous Games people on yesterday, just as an example, or we look at theater, we look at the music, exactly. It's everybody who's constantly fundraising.
And again, once the control board operationalizes the regulations, part of what that will cover is how those things, where and what mechanisms those needs are met.
Because I think that's important. I know another community member mentioned you need to take your time and make sure everything is in place.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important. They did make reference to the membership law, which was rushed through and isn't working. And I don't want to comment on that because we're talking about cannabis, and the health and safety part of it. And I think taking our time versus what's happening outside, because now it's got everybody in kind of a tailspin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather, for myself, it's better that it be done right the first time around, everything put into place, cover as much as we can in terms of what we can foreseeability. And then, once it's all there, once it's all set up, it should run smoothly. That's the
right. And who knows by then, because everything's constantly changing.
Exactly.
So and it's hard because you have to keep up with everything.
It requires a certain nimbleness.
Yeah, really, to be honest,
Yeah, exactly. So
we have maybe about another 4 minutes or so. So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to cover on this particular topic.
I'm trying to go back and recall some of the other questions that community members had or just wanted information about. Obviously, in terms of licensing, there was a couple of questions of, is there any way to get a license right now, before the law is put in place? Unfortunately, no licenses can be issued until that control board is in place because it's going to be their responsibility. So,
in terms of jumping a queue, as much as you might want to say somebody that we're trying to get a license for, Health Canada or whatever, but we're not. Can you think you can give us like a tentative or some kind of letter saying that we likely would get a Kahnawake permit. We can't really do that. It has to be, all things have to be in proper order first in order for that to happen.
Yeah, and even with Health Canada, anyone who wishes to go into the production business, they require the license from Health Canada. And Health Canada, one of their conditions or preconditions is you have to have the okay too from your community, from the municipality. If it's not a
Don't call us a municipality.
No, I was by no means calling us a municipality.
We're treading on another
Start a war.
He didn't let me finish what I was going to say. I was going to say, if you are not an Indigenous community, you're known as a municipality. So you would have to get the okay from your municipality, and often that has to do with zoning laws, etc., which we don't have here. So it's really important that we have our board in place, and that licenses can only be issued, or letters or whatever's going to become of it can only be issued once that's there.
I think one of the things I've come to learn is this is a very complex thing. It's not a simple put a law, do this, do that. It's not, because it impacts so many other areas. And when you start with health and safety, that's one aspect of it. We talked a little bit about what it does to younger people, and stops the growth of the developing brain, which in younger people is developing until 25, 26 years old. So, it causes damage there. But what's the long-term impact on that particular person, which has an impact on healthcare system, which has an impact, it doesn't end. It is a ripple effect.
And I just want to point out, Luann, and it should be noted that we're wrestling with this in Kahnawake, and we have developed a legislation to deal with the regulation of. But we are being approached by other communities that say at the Iroquois caucus level, we're all struggling with this at different, and people are looking to Kahnawake's leadership in terms of, okay, how do we deal with that? There are some communities, and I'm not going to name the communities. People who are aware can find out what those are, but they're at different places from the point of, say, having no actual regulation at all and trying to go at it from the back end retroactively. It's unenviable.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, and one of the problems with that too is there was no funding, there was no money that came to do that, and that is what a lot of our call them sister communities, they've had trouble trying to figure out what to do. It needs money. You need money.
And then I also know from a traditional aspect, there's people who've gotten in on this who are saying it's not one of our medicines. It's not, and that adds another piece to.
But in one community, you had a sort of third splinter of a traditional body who said, "No, we're handing out the thing, and you have a band council has no place."
Yeah, and again, creating more strive on this. Yeah. One last minute comment, and that's it.
I just want to say thank you to everybody in the community for your patience. It's nice having the time to chat with you all. And if you have any questions at all, please give us a call at the Mohawk Council. Tonya and I would be more than willing to answer questions.
Yep.
And I think that makes a difference, because then people aren't so, trying to guess what's going on at the council castle, as I've heard people say. And I don't mean that. I just things I've heard, and I think as honest as you can be on this topic, because it does touch a lot of people.